Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Django Unchained in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Films. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Django Unchained. I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Films. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch. It's all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you, friends, to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Django Unchained is a 2012 American revisionist Western film written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. Produced by Tarantino's A Band Apart and Columbia Pictures, it stars Jamie Foxx, Christoph Waltz, Leonardo DiCaprio, Kerry Washington and Samuel L. Jackson, Walton Goggins, Dennis Christopher, James Remar, Michael Parks, and Don Johnson also star in supporting roles. The film, set in the antebellum South and Old West, is a highly stylized, revisionist tribute to spaghetti westerns. Its title refers particularly to the 1966 Italian film Django by Sergio Corbucci. That film's star, Franco Nero, has a cameo appearance in Tarantino's. The story follows a slave who trains under a German bounty hunter with the ultimate goal of reuniting with his wife. Development of Django Unchained began in 2007, when Tarantino was writing a book on Corbucci. By April 2011, Tarantino sent his final draft of the script to the Weinstein Company, TWC. Casting began in the summer of 2011, with Michael K. Williams and Will Smith being considered for the role of the title character before Foxx was cast. Principal photography took place from November 2011 to March 2012 in California, Wyoming, and Louisiana. Django Unchained premiered at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York City on December 11, 2012, and was theatrically released by the Weinstein Company on December 25th in the United States, with Sony Pictures handling international distribution. It was a commercial success, grossing $426 million worldwide against a $100 million budget, becoming Tarantino's highest-grossing film to date. The film received acclaim from critics, mainly for Waltz and DiCaprio's performance and Tarantino's direction and screenplay. The film's extensive graphic violence and frequent use of racial slurs were controversial. The film received numerous awards and nominations, winning 2 out of 5 nominations at the 85th Academy Awards. Waltz won several awards for his performance, among them Best Supporting Actor at the Academy Awards, Golden Globes, and BAFTAs. For his screenplay, Tarantino won an Academy Award, a Golden Globe, and a BAFTA. Plot: in 1858 Texas, several male African-American slaves are being driven by the Speck brothers, Ace and Dickie. Among the shackled slaves is Django, sold off and separated from his wife, Broomhilda. The Speck brothers are stopped by Dr. King Schultz, a German ex-dentist and bounty hunter from Dusseldorf. Schultz asks to buy one of the slaves, but while questioning Django about his knowledge of the Brittle brothers, for whom Schultz is carrying a warrant, he irritates Ace, who aims his shotgun at Schultz. Schultz quickly kills Ace and leaves Dickie at the mercy of the other newly freed slaves, who kill him. Since Django can identify the Brittle brothers, Schultz offers Django his freedom in exchange for his help in tracking them down. After executing the Brittles, Django partners with Schultz through the winter and becomes his apprentice. Schultz discovers Django's natural ability with a gun. Schultz explains that, being the first person he has ever given freedom to, he feels responsible for Django and is driven to help him in his quest to rescue Broomhilda. Django, now fully trained, collects his first bounty, keeping the handbill as a good luck charm. In Mississippi, Schultz uncovers the identity of Broomhilda's owner, Calvin Candy, the charming but brutal owner of the Candyland plantation, where slaves are forced to fight to the death in wrestling matches called Mandingo fights. Schultz, expecting Candy will not sell Broomhilda if they ask for her directly, plots to feign interest in purchasing one of Candy's prized fighters, offer to purchase Broomhilda on the side for a reasonable sum, then take her and escape before the Mandingo deal is finalized. Schultz and Django meet Candy at his gentleman's club in Greenville and submit their offer. His greed tickled, Candy invites them to Candyland. After secretly briefing Broomhilda on the plan, Schultz claims to be charmed by the German-speaking Broomhilda and offers to buy her after arranging to buy a fighting slave. During dinner, Candy's staunchly loyal house slave, Stephen, becomes suspicious. Deducing that Django and Broomhilda know each other and that the sale of the Mandingo fighter is just a misdirection, Stephen alerts and privately admonishes Candy on his greed. Candy is humiliated at being fooled by a black man, but he contains his anger long enough to theatrically display his knowledge of phrenology, which he uses to justify white superiority and black inferiority. Candy's bodyguard suddenly bursts into the room with his shotgun trained on the two bounty hunters, and Candy furiously threatening to kill Broomhilda. He extorts Schultz for the complete bid amount and taunts him by demanding a formal handshake to finalize the deal before he leaves. Schultz fatally shoots Candy with a concealed derringer. He apologizes to Django before Candy's henchman kills him. Django grabs a revolver and, after a shootout in the house's foyer, is forced to surrender when Broomhilda is taken hostage at gunpoint. The next morning, Stephen tells Django that he will be sold to a mine where he will be worked to death. En route to the mine, Django proves to his dim-witted Australian escorts that he is a bounty hunter by showing them the handbill from his first kill. He convinces them that there is a large bounty for outlaws who are hiding at Candyland and promises that they would receive the majority of the money. The escorts release him and give him a pistol, and he kills them before stealing a horse and leaving for Candyland. Upon returning to the plantation, Django kills more of Candy's henchmen. He takes Broomhilda's freedom papers from Schultz's pocket and frees her from a nearby cabin. When Candy's mourners return from his burial, Django kills Candy's few remaining henchmen and his sister Laura, releases the two remaining house slaves, and kneecaps Stephen. Django ignites dynamite that he has planted throughout the mansion. He and Broomhilda watch from a distance as the mansion explodes, killing Stephen before riding off together. Cast Jamie Foxx as Django Freeman, Christoph Waltz as Dr. King Schultz, Leonardo DiCaprio as Monsieur Calvin J. Candy, Kerry Washington as Broomhilda, Hildy Von Shaft, Samuel L. Jackson as Stephen, Walton Goggins as Billy Crash, Dennis Christopher as Leonide Leo Mogi, James Remar as Butch Pooch Ace Speck, David Steen as Mr. Stonecipher, Dana Gourrier as Cora, Nicole Galicia as Sheba, Laura Caillouette as Laura Lee Candy Fitzwillie, Atuisundo as D'Artagnan, Sammy Rotibi as Rodney, Clay Donahue Fontenot as Luigi, Escalante Lundy as Big Fred, Miriam F. Glover as Bettina, Don Johnson as Spencer Big Daddy Bennett, Franco Nero as Amerigo Vespi. Other roles include James Russo as Dickie Speck, brother of Ace Speck and erstwhile owner of Django. Tom Wopat, Omar J. Dorsey, and Don Stroud play U.S. Marshal Gil Tatum, Chicken Charlie, and as Sheriff Bill Sharp, Willard Peck, respectively. Bruce Dern appears as Old Man Karukin, the owner of the Carrican Plantation. M.C. Gainey, Cooper Huckabee, and Doc Duhame portray brothers Big John Brittle, Roger Lil Raj Brittle, and Ellis Brittle, respectively, overseers of both Karukin and Big Daddy's plantations. Jonah Hill plays Baghead No. 2, a member of Bennett's masked white supremacist group. Additional roles include Lee Horsley as Sheriff Gus, Rex Lynn as Tennessee Harry, Misty Upham as Minnie, and Danielle Watts as Coco. Russ Tamblyn and his daughter Amber appear as townspeople in Doherty, Texas. Their roles are respectively credited as son of a gunfighter and daughter of son of a gunfighter. Zoe Bell, Michael Bowen, Robert Carradine, Jake Garber, Ted Neely, James Parks, and Tom Savini play Candyland trackers. Jackie Ito, who played Marcel in Tarantino's 2009 film Inglourious Bastards, makes an uncredited appearance as a slave. Michael Parks as Roy and John Jarrett as Floyd, alongside Tarantino himself in a cameo appearance as Frankie, play the LeQuint Dickey Mining Company employees. Tarantino also appears in the film as a masked baghead named Robert. Production. Development. In 2007, Quentin Tarantino discussed an idea for a type of spaghetti western set in the United States pre-Civil War Deep South. He called this type of film a Southern, stating that he wanted to do movies that deal with America's horrible past with slavery and stuff, but do them like spaghetti westerns, not like big issue movies. I want to do them like they're genre films, but they deal with everything that America has never dealt with because it's ashamed of it, and other countries don't really deal with because they don't feel they have the right to. Tarantino later explained the genesis of the idea. I was writing a book about Sergio Corbucci when I came up with a way to tell the story. I was writing about how his movies have this evil Wild West, a horrible Wild West. It was surreal. It dealt a lot with fascism. So I'm writing this whole piece on this, and I'm thinking, I don't really know if Sergio was thinking this while he was doing this, but I know I'm thinking about it now, and I can do it. Tarantino finished the script on April 26, 2011, and handed in the final draft to the Weinstein Company. In October 2012, frequent Tarantino collaborator RZA said that he and Tarantino had intended to cross over Django Unchained with RZA's Tarantino-presented martial arts film, The Man with the Iron Fists. The crossover would have seen a younger version of the blacksmith character from RZA's film appear as a slave in an auction. However, scheduling conflicts prevented RZA's participation. One inspiration for the film is Corbucci's 1966 spaghetti western Django, whose star Franco Nero has a cameo appearance in Django Unchained. Another inspiration is the 1975 film Mandingo, about a slave trained to fight other slaves. Tarantino included scenes in the snow as a homage to the 1968 film The Great Silence. Silencio takes place in the snow. I like the action in the snow so much. Django Unchained has a big snow section in the middle, Tarantino said in an interview. Tarantino credits the character and attitude of the German dentist turned bounty hunter King Schultz to the German Karl May Wild West films of the 1960s, namely their hero Old Shatterhand. The title Django Unchained alludes to the titles of the 1966 Corbucci film Django. Hercules Unchained, the American title for the 1959 Italian epic fantasy film Ercole e la Regina di Lidia, about the mythical hero's escape from enslavement to a wicked master, and to Angel Unchained, the 1970 American biker film about a biker exacting revenge on a large group of rednecks. Casting. Among those considered for the title role of Django, Michael K. Williams and Will Smith were mentioned as possibilities, but in the end, Jamie Foxx was cast in the role. Smith later said he turned down the role because it wasn't the lead and was not for me, but stated he thought the movie was brilliant. Tyrese Gibson sent in an audition tape as the character. Franco Nero, the original Django from the 1966 Italian film, was rumored for the role of Calvin Candy, but instead was given a cameo appearance as a minor character. Nero suggested that he play a mysterious horseman who haunts Django in visions and is revealed in an ending flashback to be Django's father. Tarantino opted not to use the idea. Kevin Costner was in negotiations to join as Ace Woody, a Mandingo trainer and Candy's right-hand man, but Costner dropped out due to scheduling conflicts. Kurt Russell was cast instead, but also later left the role. When Kurt Russell dropped out, the role of Ace Woody was not recast. Instead, the character was merged with Walton Goggins' character, Billy Crash. Jonah Hill was offered the role of Scotty Harmony, a gambler who loses Broomhilda to Candy in a poker game, but turned it down due to scheduling conflicts with The Watch. Sacha Baron Cohen was also offered the role, but declined in order to appear in Les Miserables. Neither Scotty nor the poker game appear in the final cut of the film. Hill later appeared in the film in a different role. Joseph Gordon-Levitt said that he would have loved to have been in the film, but would be unable to appear because of a prior commitment to direct his first film, Don John. Costume design. In a January 2013 interview with Vanity Fair, costume designer Sharon Davis said much of the film's wardrobe was inspired by spaghetti westerns and other works of art. For Django's wardrobe, Davis and Tarantino watched the television series Bonanza and referred to it frequently. The pair even hired the hat maker who designed the hat worn by the Bonanza character Little Joe, played by Michael Landon. Davis described Django's look as a rock and roll take on the character. Django's sunglasses were inspired by Charles Bronson's character in The White Buffalo, 1977. Davis used Thomas Gainsborough oil painting The Blue Boy, C-1770, as a reference for Django's valet outfit. In the final scene, Broomhilda wears a dress similar to that of Ida Galli's character in Blood for a Silver Dollar, 1965. Davis said the idea of Calvin Candy's costume came partly from Rhett Butler, and that Don Johnson's signature Miami Vice look inspired Big Daddy's cream-colored linen suit in the film. King Schultz's faux chinchilla coat was inspired by Telly Savalas and Kojak. Davis also revealed that many of her costume ideas did not make the final cut of the film, leaving some unexplained characters, such as Zoe Bell's tracker, who was intended to drop her bandana to reveal an absent jaw. Filming. Principal photography for Django Unchained started in California in November 2011, continuing in Wyoming in February 2012, and at the National Historic Landmark Evergreen Plantation in Wallace, Louisiana, outside of New Orleans, in March 2012. The film was shot in the anamorphic format on 35mm film. Although originally scripted, a subplot centering on Zoe Bell's masked tracker was cut and remained unfilmed due to time constraints. After 130 shooting days, the film wrapped up principal photography in July 2012. Kerry Washington sought to bring authenticity to her performance in several ways. The actor playing her overseer used a fake whip, but Washington insisted the lashings really hit her back. And to dramatize her punishment inside an underground coffin-sized metal container, she and Tarantino agreed she would spend time barely clothed in the hot box before the filming began, so the feeling of confinement would be as realistic as possible. Django Unchained was the first Tarantino film not edited by Sally Menke, who died in 2010. Editing duties were instead handled by Fred Raskin, who had worked as an assistant editor on Tarantino's Kill Bill. Raskin was nominated for a BAFTA Award for Best Editing, but lost to William Goldenberg for his work on Argo. Broken glass incident. During the scene when DiCaprio's character explains phrenology, DiCaprio cut his left hand upon striking the table and smashing a small glass. Despite his hand profusely bleeding, DiCaprio barely reacted and remained in character under the astonished eyes of his fellow actors. He is seen taking out pieces of broken glass from his hand during the scene. After Tarantino's cut, there was a standing ovation by the other actors to praise DiCaprio's performance despite the incident. Tarantino, therefore, decided to keep this sequence in the final cut. DiCaprio is seen with his left hand bandaged in the scene after when he is signing Broomhilda's papers. Contrary to popular belief, DiCaprio wiped fake blood on Washington's face in a separate take. Music. Main article, Django Unchained. The film features both original and existing music tracks. Tracks composed specifically for the film include 100 Black Coffins by Rick Ross and produced by and featuring Jamie Foxx, Who Did That to You by John Legend, Ancora Key by Ennio Morricone and Elisa, and Freedom by Anthony Hamilton and Elena Boynton. The theme, Django, was also the theme song of the 1966 film. Musician Frank Ocean wrote an original song for the film's soundtrack, but it was rejected by Tarantino, who explained that Ocean wrote a fantastic ballad that was truly lovely and poetic in every way, but there just wasn't a scene for it. Ocean later published the song, entitled Wiseman, on his Tumblr blog. The film also features a few famous pieces of Western classical music, including Beethoven's Für Elise and Dies Irae from Verdi's Requiem. Tarantino has stated that he avoids using full scores of original music. I just don't like the idea of giving that much power to anybody on one of my movies. The film's soundtrack album was released on December 18, 2012. Morricone made statements criticizing Tarantino's use of his music in Django Unchained and stated that he would never work with the director after this film, but later agreed to compose an original film score for Tarantino's The Hateful Eight in 2015. In a scholarly essay on the film's music, Hollis Robbins notes that the vast majority of film music borrowings comes from films made between 1966 and 1974, and argues that the political and musical resonances of these allusions situate Django Unchained squarely in the Vietnam and Watergate era, during the rise and decline of Black Power cinema. Jim Croce's hit, I Got a Name, was featured in the soundtrack. Release. Marketing. The first teaser poster was inspired by a fan art poster by Italian artist Federico Mancosu. His artwork was published in May 2011, a few days after the synopsis and the official title were released to the public. In August 2011, at Tarantino's request, the production companies bought the concept artwork from Mancosu to use for promotional purposes as well as on the crew passes and clothing for staff during filming. Theatrical run. Django Unchained was released on December 25, 2012, in the United States by the Weinstein Company and released on January 18, 2013 by Sony Pictures Releasing in the United Kingdom. The film was screened for the first time at the Directors Guild of America on December 1, 2012, with additional screening events having been held for critics leading up to the film's wide release. The premiere of Django Unchained was delayed by 1 week following the shooting at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012. The film was released on March 22, 2013 by Sony Pictures in India. In March 2013, Django Unchained was announced to be the first Tarantino film approved for official distribution in China's strictly controlled film market. Lily Kuo, writing for Quartz, wrote that the film depicts one of America's darker periods when slavery was legal, which Chinese officials like to use to push back against criticism from the United States. The film was released in China on May 12, 2013. Home media. The film was released on DVD, Blu-ray, and digital download on April 16, 2013. In the United States, the film has grossed $31,939,733 from DVD sales and $30,186,008 from Blu-ray sales, making a total of $62,226,571. Reception. Box office. Django Unchained grossed $162.8 million in the United States and Canada and $263.2 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $426 million against a production budget of $100 million. As of 2013, Django Unchained is Tarantino's highest-grossing film, surpassing his previous film Inglourious Basterds, 2009, which grossed $321.4 million worldwide. In North America, the film made $15 million on Christmas Day, finishing second behind fellow opener Les Miserables. It was the third biggest opening day figure for a film on Christmas, following Sherlock Holmes, $24.6 million, and Les Miserables, $18.1 million. It went on to make $30.1 million in its opening weekend, a 6-day total of $63.4 million, finishing second behind Holdover the Hobbit and Unexpected Journey. Critical response. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 87% based on 296 reviews and an average rating of 8/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "Bold, bloody, and stylistically daring, Django Unchained is another incendiary masterpiece from Quentin Tarantino." Metacritic, which assigns a rating to reviews, gives the film a weighted average score of 81 out of 100 based on 42 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A- on an A+ to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 4 stars out of 4 and said, "The film offers one sensational sequence after another, all set around these two intriguing characters who seem opposites but share pragmatic, financial, and personal issues." Ebert also added, "Had I not been prevented from seeing it sooner because of an injury, this would have been on my year's best films list." Peter Bradshaw, film critic for The Guardian, awarded the film 5 stars, writing, "I can only say Django delivers wholesale that particular narcotic and delirious pleasure that Tarantino still knows how to confect in the cinema, something to do with the manipulation of surfaces. It's as unwholesome, deplorable, and delicious as a forbidden cigarette." Writing in the New York Times, critic A.O. Scott compared Django to Tarantino's earlier Inglourious Basterds. Like Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained is crazily entertaining, brazenly irresponsible, and also ethically serious in a way that is entirely consistent with its playfulness. Designating the film a Times Critics pick, Scott said Django is a troubling and important movie about slavery and racism. Filmmaker Michael Moore praised Django, tweeting that the movie is one of the best film satires ever. Dan Jolin of Empire magazine praised DiCaprio's performance, saying he plays the role of Candy to hateful perfection. A spiteful, brown-toothed bully, avaricious, vain, and prone to flattery, but criticized Foxx as a comparatively weak link whose soft musical voice jars against Django's terse deliveries. To the contrary, Owen Gleiberman, film critic for the Entertainment Weekly, wrote, "Django isn't nearly the film that Inglourious was. It's less clever, and it doesn't have enough major characters or enough of Tarantino's trademark structural ingenuity to earn its 2-hour and 45-minute running time." In his review for the Indie Week, David Fellereth wrote, Django Unchained shows signs that Tarantino did little research beyond repeated viewings of Sergio Corbucci's 1966 spaghetti western Django and a blaxploitation from 1975 called Boss Nigger, written by and starring Fred Williamson. New Yorker's Anthony Lane was disturbed by their Tarantino's fans' yelps of triumphant laughter at the screening I attended as a white woman was blown away by Django's guns. An entire issue of the academic journal Safundi was devoted to Django Unchained in Django Unchained and the Global Western, featuring scholars who contextualized Tarantino's film as a classic Western. Dana Phillips writes, Tarantino's film is immensely entertaining, not despite but because it is so very audacious, even at times downright lurid, thanks to its treatment of slavery, race relations, and that staple of the Western, violence. No doubt, these are matters that another director would have handled more delicately, and with less stylistic excess than Tarantino, who has never been bashful. Another director also would have been less willing to proclaim his film the first in a new genre, the Southern. Accolades. Main article, list of accolades received by Django Unchained. Django Unchained garnered several awards and nominations. The American Film Institute named it one of its top 10 movies of the year in December 2012. The film received 5 Golden Globe Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director and Best Screenplay for Tarantino. Tarantino won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Christoph Waltz received the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, the Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor, and the BAFTA Award for Best Supporting Actor, his second time receiving all 3 awards, having previously won for his role in Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. The NAACP Image Awards gave the film 4 nominations, while the National Board of Review named DiCaprio their Best Supporting Actor. Django Unchained earned a nomination for Best Theatrical Motion Picture from the Producers Guild of America. Criticism. Use of racial slurs and portrayal of slavery. Some commentators thought that the film's overusage of the word nigger was inappropriate. They objected to that even more than to the extensive violence depicted against the slaves. Other reviewers have defended the usage of the language in the historical context of race and slavery in the United States. African-American filmmaker Spike Lee, in an interview with Vibe, said he would not see the film, explaining, "All I'm going to say is that it's disrespectful to my ancestors. That's just me. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else." Lee later wrote, "American slavery was not a Sergio Leone spaghetti western. It was a Holocaust. My ancestors are slaves stolen from Africa. I will honor them." Actor and activist Jesse Williams has contrasted accuracy of the racist language used in the film with what he sees as the film's lack of accuracy about the general lives of slaves, too often portrayed as well-dressed negresses in flowing gowns, frolicking on swings and enjoying leisurely strolls through the grounds, as if the setting is Versailles, mixed in with occasional acts of barbarism against slaves. That authenticity card that Tarantino uses to buy all those niggers has an awfully selective memory. He also criticizes what seems to be a lack of solidarity among slave characters and their general lack of a will to escape from slavery, with Django as the notable exception. Wesley Morris of the Boston Globe praised the realism of the villain Stephen, played by Samuel L. Jackson, comparing him to such black Republicans as Clarence Thomas or Herman Cain. Jackson said that he believed his character to have the same moral compass as Clarence Thomas does. Jackson defended the extensive use of the word nigger. Saying Tarantino said nigger too many times is like complaining they said kike sick too many times in a movie about Nazis. The review by Jesse Williams notes, however, that these anti-Semitic terms were not used nearly as frequently in Tarantino's film about Nazis, *Inglourious Basterds*, as he used nigger in Django. He suggested that the Jewish community would not have accepted it. Writing in the Los Angeles Times, journalist Aaron Aubrey Kaplan noted the difference between Tarantino's Jackie Brown and Django Unchained. It is an institution whose horrors need no exaggerating, yet Django does exactly that, either to enlighten or entertain. A white director slinging around the N-word in a homage to 70s blaxploitation a la Jackie Brown is one thing, but the same director turning the savageness of slavery into pulp fiction is quite another. While hosting NBC's Saturday Night Live, Jamie Foxx joked about being excited to kill all the white people in the movie. Conservative columnist Jeff Kuhner responded to the SNL skit for the Washington Times, saying, "Anti-white bigotry has become embedded in our postmodern culture. Take Django Unchained. The movie boils down to one central theme: the white man as devil, a moral scourge who must be eradicated like a lethal virus." Samuel L. Jackson said to Vogue Man that Django Unchained was a harder and more detailed exploration of what the slavery experience was than 12 Years a Slave. But director Steve McQueen is an artist, and since he's respected for making supposedly art films, it's held in higher esteem than Django, because that was basically a blaxploitation movie. Violence. The film became infamous for its brutality, with some reviews criticizing it for being much too violent. The originally planned premiere of Django was postponed following the Sandy Hook school shooting on December 14, 2012. Thomas Frank criticized the film's use of violence as follows. Not surprisingly, Quentin Tarantino has lately become the focus for this sort of criticism about the relationship between the movies and acts of violence. The fact that Django Unchained arrived in theaters right around the time of the Sandy Hook massacre didn't help. Yet he has refused to give an inch in discussing the link between movie violence and real life. Obviously, I don't think one has to do with the other. Movies are about make-believe. It's about imagination. Part of the thing is trying to create a realistic experience, but we are faking it. Is it possible that anyone in our cynical world credits a self-serving sophistry like this? Of course, an industry under fire will claim that its hands are clean, just as the NRA has done. And, of course, a favorite son, be it Tarantino or LaPierre, can be counted on to make the claim louder than anyone else. But do they really believe that imaginative expression is without consequence? The Independent said the movie was part of the new sadism in cinema and added, "There is something disconcerting about sitting in a crowded cinema as an audience guffaws at the latest garroting or falls about in hysterics as someone is beheaded or has a limb lopped off." Adam Serwer from Mother Jones said, "Django, like many Tarantino films, also has been criticized as cartoonishly violent, but it is only so when Django is killing slave owners and overseers. The violence against slaves is always appropriately terrifying. This, if nothing else, puts Django in the running for Tarantino's best film, the first one in which he discovers violence as horror rather than just spectacle. When Schultz turns his head away from a slave being torn apart by dogs, Django explains to Calvin Candy, the plantation owner played by Leo DiCaprio, that Schultz just isn't used to Americans. Mandingo fights. Although Tarantino has said about Mandingo fighting, I was always aware those things existed. There is no definitive historical evidence that slave owners ever staged gladiator-like fights to the death between male slaves like the fight depicted in the movie. Historian Edna Green Medford notes that there are only undocumented rumors that such fights took place. David Blight, the director of Yale's Center for the Study of Slavery, said it was not a matter of moral or ethical reservations that prevented slave owners from pitting slaves against each other in combat, but rather economic self-interest. Slave owners would not have wanted to put their substantial financial investments at risk in gladiatorial battles. The non-historical term mandingo for a fine fighting or breeding slave comes not from Tarantino, but the 1975 film Mandingo, which was itself based on a 1957 novel with the same title. Historical inaccuracies. Writing in The New Yorker, William Jelani Cobb observed that Tarantino's occasional historical elasticity sometimes worked to the film's advantage. There are moments, Cobb wrote, where this convex history works brilliantly, like when Tarantino depicts the Ku Klux Klan a decade prior to its actual formation in order to thoroughly ridicule its members' veiled racism. Tarantino holds that the masked marauders depicted in the film were not the KKK, but a group known as the Regulators. They were depicted as spiritual forebears of the later post-Civil War KKK, and not as the actual KKK. On the matter of historical accuracy, Christopher Caldwell wrote in the Financial Times, "Of course, we must not mistake a feature film for a public television documentary," pointing out that the film should be treated as entertainment, not as a historical account of the period it is set in. Django uses slavery the way a pornographic film might use a nurse's convention, as a pretext for what is really meant to entertain us. What is really meant to entertain us in Django is violence. Richard Brody, however, wrote in The New Yorker that Tarantino's vision of slavery's monstrosity is historically accurate. Tarantino rightly depicts slavery as no mere administrative ownership, but a grievous and monstrous infliction of cruelty. Comic book adaptations. A comic book adaptation of Django Unchained was released by DC Comics in 2013. In 2015, a sequel crossover comic entitled Django Zorro was released by Dynamite Entertainment, co-written by Tarantino and Matt Wagner, the latter being the first comic book sequel to a Quentin Tarantino film. Future proposed miniseries. Tarantino has said in an interview that he has 90 minutes of unused material and considered re-editing Django Unchained into a 4-hour, 4-night cable miniseries. Tarantino said that breaking the story into 4 parts would be more satisfying to audiences than a 4-hour movie. It wouldn't be an endurance test. It would be a miniseries, and people love those. Potential crossover sequel. Tarantino's first attempt at a Django Unchained sequel was with the unpublished paperback novel titled Django in White Hell. However, after Tarantino decided that the tone of the developing story did not fit with the character's morals, he began rewriting it as an original screenplay, which later became the director's follow-up film, The Hateful Eight. In June 2019, Tarantino had picked Jared Carmichael to co-write a film adaptation based on the Django Zorro crossover comic book series. Tarantino and Jamie Foxx have both expressed interest in having Antonio Banderas reprise his role as Zorro from The Mask of Zorro 1998 and The Legend of Zorro 2005 in the film, in addition to Foxx himself reprising his role as Django. Django Unchained? Review. When I first saw Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, I wrote that it was as deplorable and delicious as a forbidden cigarette. This second time around, I'm still dizzy from something meaner than nicotine. This brilliant and brutal revenge western with its Bromcom double act from Jamie Foxx and Christoph Waltz is set among the slave plantations of pre-Civil War America. It is partly based on the 1960s cult Django Western starring Franco Nero, who returns in cameo here, and partly on the notorious 1975 exploitation picture Mandingo. But it's distinctive on its own fantastically outrageous terms, an audacious and horribly funny comic book nightmare. Tarantino, king of the comeback, famously returned John Travolta to the pop culture frontline for Pulp Fiction, and indeed renewed crime writer Eddie Bunker's Pulp Fiction stardom by getting him an acting gig as Mr. Blue in Reservoir Dogs. Now Tarantino has made his own comeback after a recent worrying slump with his best film since Kill Bill Vol. 1. It's certainly an awful lot better than the previous film Inglourious Bastards, which I attacked on account of its misfiring spaghetti Nazi theme and bafflingly dull plot. I should here record that many did not agree with this view, and my previous lavish praise for the great man only seemed to make things worse. Someone online called me a petulant Tarantini bopper throwing a strop. Well, possibly. For me, Tarantino had always been the master of a certain type of narcotic euphoria in the cinema. Something exquisitely superfluous, something to do with his mastery of surface and style, an ability to make you believe in it and see through it at the same time. That ability has gloriously returned. Foxx plays Django, a slave in 1858, who on being transported through Texas in the bitter winter cold, has a fateful encounter with the extraordinary Dr. King Schultz, a mysterious German former dentist played by Christoph Waltz, with dapper and dainty eccentricity and smilingly faultless English. Django's new friend gives him a taste of freedom, but is astonished to learn of his connection with a fellow slave, a beautiful woman named Broomhilda, Kerry Washington. It is a mishearing of the name Brunhilde given by her German masters. She is being held at the plantation Candyland in Mississippi, owned by the revolting racist and sadist Calvin Candy, unforgettably played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Somehow, and with Schultz's help, Django must get her out. His soul will never be unchained until he sets his love free and takes a terrible revenge on her oppressor. DiCaprio's Candy is hideously self-possessed with southern politesse and a crocodile grin revealing bad teeth, which, given Dr. Schultz's abandoned vocation, may have been intended by Tarantino as a subliminal ill omen. He has a kind of ruined charisma, a shabby youth running to the seed of early middle age, and he is easily outdone in terms of presence by Foxx's Django, who, after a bizarre experiment with a sub-Pierrot servant costume, carries off the cowboy style with an incomparable swagger. Good as they are, Foxx, DiCaprio, Waltz, and Washington are utterly upstaged by Samuel L. Jackson, who gives an extraordinary performance as Stephen, Candy's household attendant, an Uncle Tom figure utterly and aggressively loyal to the white master, with a deathly stare, a disturbing Parkinson's-type tremor, and a habit of dropping the N-bomb more aggressively than anyone else. And heaven knows everyone is dropping it pretty aggressively. With muscular tactlessness, Tarantino has taken the stereotype and turned it up to 11. Stephen is a piton in the below-stairs Vichyite regime, propping up the ruler's loathsome racism. Django himself, imposing as a Mandingo trader of slaves trained to fight, is sickened by his own pretense as a collaborator. Tarantino shoves everything like this under your nose. Only he and Jackson could possibly have got away with that Stephen character. It is genuinely gasp-inducing. Slavery is a subject on which modern Hollywood is traditionally nervous, a reticence amounting almost to a conspiracy of silence, except, of course, in the explicit context of abolition. As far as Hollywood is concerned, the day-to-day existence of unabolished slavery has been what welfare reformists called the live rail. Don't touch it. It takes a film unencumbered with liberal good taste to try. Lars von Trier's Manderley was one, and here is another. Perhaps the most significant moments are when Django is trained by Schultz as a gunfighter. From any distance, on any occasion, Django can shoot with ruthless accuracy and verve, and afterwards permits himself a grin of pleasure. Is that a metaphor for Tarantino's own shooting? All I can say is that I matched the hero's smile with one of my own. Consider now the curious character of Dr. King Schultz. He is an itinerant dentist who works from his little wagon, traveling the back roads of the pre-Civil War South. As Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained opens, we see a line of shackled slaves being led through what I must describe as a deep, dark forest, because those are the kinds of forests we meet in fairy tales. Out of this deepness and darkness, Schultz, Christoph Waltz, appears, his lantern swinging from his wagon, which has a bobbling tooth on its roof. I added material involving Stephen, played by Samuel L. Jackson. For the record, my star rating would be 4 stars. Yes, had I not been prevented from seeing it sooner because of an injury, this would have been on my year's best films list. Schultz explains himself with the elaborate formality he will use all through the film. He has reason to believe one of the slaves might be of interest to him. This is the slave named Django, Jamie Foxx. He enters into negotiations to purchase Django, who he has reason to believe may help him in finding the Brittle brothers for reasons involving the doctor's late wife. And already Tarantino has us, and it's off to the races. The film offers one sensational sequence after another, all set around these two intriguing characters who seem opposites but share pragmatic financial and personal issues. We never look back. Maybe it's just as well. But now I must ask, before the plot hurtles ahead, does it strike you as strange that Dr. King Schultz, in all of the vastness of the South, should have been driving his wagon through just that very deep, dark forest where Django was being led? How could he have even known about that? How odd that the path of the wagon and the slaves, which should have sailed past one another like two ships in the night, should meet head to head. Let us leave Dr. Schultz engaging in one of his several financial transactions during the film, fueled by a generous supply of cash. Let us explain him. He is a wizard from a fairy tale. A man capable of knowing about people's lives, steering their fates, seducing them into situations in which they receive the destinies they deserve. Although there is a great deal of the realistic in Django Unchained, including brutal violence, King Schultz is not real in the same way as the rest. I require the term deus ex machina. I apologize to my many readers who already know it. A deus, for those few who may not, is a person or device in a story that appears from out of the blue and has a solution to offer. I quote Wikipedia. The Latin phrase deus ex machina comes to English usage from Horace's Ars Poetica, where he instructs poets that they must never resort to a god from the machine to solve their plots. He refers to the conventions of Greek tragedy, where a crane machan was used to lower actors playing gods onto the stage. Imagine Tarantino, his feet braced on clouds, lowering Dr. Schultz into Django Unchained and using him as a wonderfully useful device to guide the plot wherever it must go. In the film, we'll find that Dr. Schultz, who we never see pulling any teeth, is a bounty hunter, searching for men who are wanted, dead or alive. Here is a plot that requires a lot of information and doesn't have any time to lose in introducing it or searching for it. Schultz not only knows who and where Django is, but he knows where certain wanted men can be found, living under aliases. He shoots a sheriff and calmly explains why. He produces the wanted posters from his bottomless wallet. His knowledge allows Tarantino to set up perfectly entertaining scenes in which it appears Schultz digs himself into holes and then escapes from them. He also becomes the friend and partner of Django, gives him his freedom, and after a winter spent in using Django as his partner in bounty hunting, joins with him in trying to win back possession of Broomhilda, Kerry Washington, Django's wife. Why does he do this? Because he likes Django and hates slavery. This is a convenience making QT's storytelling much easier. This is a brilliant entertainment, in which Tarantino takes on the subject of slavery as he did the Holocaust in his previous film, Inglourious Basterds. That one, too, employed Christoph Waltz in a leading role, using his German-accented formalities to talk his way through situations. Tarantino loves dialogue and lets it run at unusual length for the quasi-exploitation genre. Consider QT's audacity in allowing Bastards to open with so much verbiage. Tarantino is a man who tells us his early job was in a video store where, if this can be believed, he viewed virtually every video. He left that job in 1989. 5 years later, I was talking to him at Cannes, where the video store clerk from Knoxville had entered Pulp Fiction, the eventual Palme d'Or winner. One thing he didn't learn from those exploitation classics was the art of sparse dialogue. You can almost imagine his relish in retelling the stories of his favorite films in more detail than they used. Because Django is so filled with violence and transgressive behavior, he told me something that day that's worth remembering when discussing Django. When I'm writing a movie, I hear the laughter. People talk about the violence. What about the comedy? Pulp Fiction has such an obviously comic spirit, even with all the weird things that are happening. To me, the most torturous thing in the world, and this counts for Reservoir Dogs just as much as it does to Pulp, is to watch it with an audience who doesn't know they're supposed to laugh. Because that's a death. Because I'm hearing the laughs in my mind and there's this dead silence of crickets sounding in the audience, you know? I sorta know. There were, however, some dead crickets in my mind during the scene in Django Unchained where we visit a southern plantation run by a genteel monster named Calvin Candy, Leonardo DiCaprio, who for his after-dinner entertainment is having two slaves fight each other to the death. It's a brutal fight, covered with the blood that flows unusually copiously in the film. The losing slave screams without stopping, and I reflected that throughout the film, there is much more screaming in a violent scene than you usually hear. Finally, the fight is over, and there's a shot of the defeated slave's head as a hammer is dropped on the floor next to it by Mr. Candy. The hammer, off-screen but barely, is used by the fight's winner to finish off his opponent. At this point in the film, I found myself mentally composing a letter to Quentin, explaining why I stopped watching his film. The letter went unwritten. There are such scenes in most Tarantino films. Do you remember Michael Madsen cutting off the cop's ear in Reservoir Dogs? When QT begins a movie, I believe, his destination is to aim over the top. The top itself will not do. We know that he is a student and champion of exploitation films. He digests their elements and reforms them at the highest level of their ambitions. The point of the exploitation genre is to grab people on the basis of the shocking material itself, regardless of such elements as movie stars, budgets, artistry, profundity, or anything else. In the hearts of many moviegoers, there stubbornly lurks the desire to be exploited. This is an irrefutable fact. On the post-holiday weekend I'm writing, Django ended second at the box office with $20 million. The Hobbit was third with $17.5 million and Les Miserables fourth with $16 million. The weekend's number one top-grossing film was a retread, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D, with $23 million. This could be misleading. Django's current total is $106 million after only 2 weeks, but it's revealing. What Tarantino has is an appreciation for gut-level exploitation film appeal, combined with an artist's desire to transform that gut element with something higher, better, more daring. His films challenge taboos in our society in the most direct possible way, and at the same time add an element of parody or satire. Consider the fight scene I described. Where's the comedy? Tarantino says he hears laughter in his mind. Why? I suspect it's because this entire film takes the painful, touchy subject of slavery and approaches it without the slightest restraint. At some point in the scene, QT's laughter may be because the audience expects to see violence, but doesn't expect to get it at such an extreme. He's rubbing it in. The film is often beautiful to regard. Tarantino's southern plantations are flatlands in spring, cloud-covered, with groups of slaves standing as figures in a landscape. His film leads us all the way to Candyland, where the odious Calvin Candy owns Django's wife Broomhilda von Shaft, Kerry Washington. Candy stages fights to the death with slaves called Mandingos, and Schultz says he wants to buy one of the fighters. He says he'll throw in a little extra for Candy's slave woman Broomhilda because she speaks German and he yearns to speak his native tongue. That's clever misdirection with the Mandingo as a cover story. Candy believes it, not everybody at Candyland does. This is such a flamboyant film that the most challenging performance in it, the one that rubs it in the most, actually runs the risk of being overlooked. That is Samuel L. Jackson's work as Stephen, Calvin Candy's most favored and privileged slave. He acts as butler and chief of staff at Candyland. He is well-dressed, treated with relative respect by Candy, and seen by the other slaves as no better than a racist white. Worse, because he betrays his race. He is the classic Uncle Tom, elevated to Grand Uncle Thomas-esque. There's a telling scene where Stephen and Calvin relax behind closed doors at the end of the day, sharing snifters of brandy. In these closed quarters, they might be equals. I was reminded of Downton Abbey and the privileged conversations between the Earl of Grantham and the butler Carson. No doubt Stephen leads the most comfortable life possible for a slave at that time, but what a price he pays. No one has glowering eyes that threaten more than Jackson's. And we can all but read his mind as he regards Django, Broomhilda, and Schultz and sees through Schutz's story that he wants to pay a preposterous price just for someone to speak German with. He confronts Calvin with the obvious. It is Django who loves Broomhild and desires her. Revealing this truth involves Stephen in a betrayal that in some respects is the most hateful action in the movie, because he sins not only against the others, but against himself. He confirms that in some putrid sinkhole of his soul, he regards himself as white. How Tarantino deals with the consequences of his betrayal sets the whole ending of the film into motion, with its satisfactory Quentonian celebration of violence, explosions, all that stuff. Stephen is also, if you will, a deus, cranked down onto the stage so his realizations can cut through revelation of the secret the others share. He works for that purpose, but also in a film that condemns white racism, is also capable of seeing black racism. Stephen is a crucial character because he forces African American viewers to acknowledge the role some of their forebears played at the time. Just as more recently in South Africa, a system in which one person rules 10 is made possible by the cooperation of some of the 10. It is a hard, unavoidable fact. Jackson's performance requires not only his gifts as an actor, but his courage as a man who understands the utility of an obvious role and is willing to play it. The name Von Shaft also reflects QT's wicked fondness for bringing distracting and outlandish names into the midst of dead serious and violent material, as sort of a signal to the audience that Tarantino knows he's treading on the edge of parody. Tarantino's predecessor, Russ Meyer, also loved to saddle his characters with unexpected names. In Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, we find Eufaula Roop, Mr. Peterbilt, Dr. Asa Lavender, Semper Fidelis, Norse Flovilla Thatch, and Bo Badger. The name Eufaula, Russ told me, came from the name of the southern town where one of his old army buddies lived. Django has been criticized for its overuse of the N-word, a long-standing charge against Tarantino. In this case, although the total comes to over 100, I understood it as a word in common daily use through the antebellum South. In context, there was a reason for it. The film has also been attacked for its incredible level of violence, and that's what I was responding to in composing my imaginary letter to Tarantino. Yes, it deserves its R rating, and in an earlier day might have drawn the X. But it's not what a film does, but how it does it. And in one sense, the violence here reflects Tarantino's desire to break through audiences' comfort level for exploitation films and insist, yes, this was a society and culture that was inhuman. Tarantino attacks at all levels. One of his most inspired scenes involves the Klan members bitching and moaning that they can't see through the eye holes on the hoods over their heads. In everything but subject, that could be from a Looney Tunes movie. QT is grandiose and pragmatic. He plays freely with implausibility, he gets his customers inside the tent, and then gives them a carny show they're hardly prepared for. He is a consummate filmmaker. Looking at his IMDb entry, I find that Tarantino has a film in pre-production that will be some kind of retread of Russ Meyer's Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. That's the film John Waters has described as not only the greatest film ever made, but the greatest film that ever will be made. For Tarantino, the lure of the title alone must have been irresistible, a tug in the back of his mind from those long-ago video store days. The D is silent, though the name of Django Unchained's eponymous gunslinger sounds like a retaliatory whip across the face of white slaveholders, offering an immensely satisfying taste of antebellum empowerment packaged as spaghetti western homage. Christened after a coffin-toting Sergio Corbucci character who metes out bloody justice below the Mason-Dixon line, Django joins a too-short list of slaves-turned-heroes in American cinema. As this zeitgeist-shaping romp cleverly upgrades the mysterious man in black archetype to a formidable black man. Once again, Quentin Tarantino rides to the Weinstein's rescue, delivering a bloody hilarious and hilariously bloody Christmas counter-programmer, which Sony will unleash abroad. After Inglourious Bastards and Kill Bill, it would be reasonable to assume that Django Unchained is yet another of Tarantino's elaborate revenge fantasies, when in fact, the film represents the writer-director's first real love story, not counting his Badlands-inspired screenplays for True Romance and Natural-Born Killers. At its core is a slave marriage between Django, Jamie Foxx, and Hildy, Kerry Washington, torn asunder after the couple attempt to escape a spiteful plantation owner, Bruce Dern, blink and you miss him. Brutally whipped and then resold to separate bidders on the Greenville Misser auction block, Django and his bride, whose outrageous full name, Broomhilde von Schaft, blends epic German legend with the greatest of blaxploitation heroes, possess a love too great to be shackled by slavery. But getting even with Dern's character doesn't feature on Django's agenda. After settling the score with his former overseers early in the film, he cares only about reuniting with his wife. Django Unchained could also qualify as a buddy movie, an odd twist considering that Corbucci's original Django was a loner, as played by Franco Nero, who cameos in this film. Liberally reinventing a character bastardized in more than 30 unofficial sequels, Tarantino pairs this new black Django with a bounty hunter named Dr. King Schultz, Christoph Waltz. Posing as a dentist, Waltz's charming figure first emerges in the dead of night, driving an absurd-looking carriage with a giant tooth bobbing on top. The first indication of how funny the film is going to be. As in Bastards, Waltz's genteel manner masks a startling capacity for ruthlessness. This time, however, he's undeniably one of the good guys. Though he tracks and kills men for a living, the Doctor is fundamentally fair, shooting only when provoked or justified. Happening upon Django's chain gang, Schultz offers to buy the slave from his redneck escorts. When they decline, he leaves the traitors for dead and liberates their property, enlisting Django in his bounty-hunting business. Tarantino's on sensitive turf here, and he knows it, using these early scenes not only to establish the cruelty shown toward slaves in the South, but also to deliver the same sort of revisionist comeuppance Jewish soldiers took upon Hitler in his last picture. Ironically, as a well-read and clearly more enlightened German, Schultz is disapproving of Americans' claims to racial superiority, which positions him as the story's moral conscience. When the time comes, he will accompany Django to Candyland, the plantation where Hildy now resides under the thumb of the unctuous Calvin Candy, Leonardo DiCaprio. But the film seems to be in no hurry to get there, focusing on Django's most unusual education, killing white men, for the first 90 minutes of the director's longest feature yet. Tarantino freely quotes from his favorite stylistic sources, whether odors or otherwise, featuring lightning-quick zooms, an insert of unpicked cotton drenched in blood, and a shot of Django riding into town framed through a hangman's noose. Early on, Foxx appears to be following Waltz's lead, but once the snow melts on the bounty-hunting subplot, an extended homage to Corbucci's The Great Silence, all traces of subservience disappear, and Foxx steps forth, guiding this triumphant folk hero through a stunning transformation. True to its spaghetti western roots, the pic reveals most of its stoic hero's unspoken motivations through garishly colored flashbacks, though Tarantino and editor Fred Raskin, stepping in for the late Sally Menke, seem to realize that limited glimpses of such white-on-black sadism go a long way. Filmmakers who choose to portray this shameful chapter of America's past bear a certain responsibility not to sanitize it. But here, even as it lays the groundwork for Django's vengeance, dwelling on such brutality can verge on exploitation. To wit, the film problematically features no fewer than 109 instances of the N-word, most of them deployed either for laughs or alliteration. While good taste doesn't necessarily apply, comedy seems to be the key that distinguishes Django Unchained from a risible film like Mandingo. Both take a certain horror pleasure in watching bare-chested black men wrestle to the death, the sick sport at which Candy prides himself an expert. But what better way to inoculate the power of a Klan rally than by turning it into a Mel Brooks routine? Reducing bigots to buffoons as they argue about their ill-fitting white hoods? Using rap and other cheeky music cues to similar effect, the script repeatedly finds ways to use the characters' racism against them, most ingeniously in its somewhat protracted second half. According to Schultz, if he and Django were to show up at Candyland and offer to buy Hildy directly, they'd be laughed off the plantation, so they hatch a plan to pose as men looking to buy a Mandingo fighter. But there's a flaw to their logic. Since the direct request approach worked fine with Don Johnson's Big Daddy earlier, it allows the film to explore the complex caste system among slaves. There are two things Tarantino, as a director, has virtually perfected: staging Mexican standoffs and spinning dialogue for delayed gratification. And expert examples of both await at Candyland. Seductively revealing a dark side odds have never seen before, DiCaprio plays Candy as a self-entitled brat, spewing the character's white supremacy theories through tobacco-stained teeth. Like a southern despot, he surrounds himself with menacing cohorts, none more dangerous than Old Steven, Samuel L. Jackson, who runs the affairs of Candy's household and represents a form of toxic black-on-black rivalry still smoldering in American culture today. Gorgeously lit and lensed by Robert Richardson against authentic American landscapes as opposed to the Italian soil Corbucci used, the film pays breathtaking respect not just to Tarantino's many cinematic influences, but to the country itself, envisioning a way out of the slavery mess it depicts. In sheer formal terms, Django Unchained is rich enough to reward multiple viewings, while thematics will make this thorny Southern, as the director aptly dubs it, perhaps his most closely studied work. Of particular interest will be Tarantino's two cameos, one delivered with an Australian accent and the other alongside Jonah Hill in the Baghead scene. Quentin Tarantino's brilliant and brutal revenge western is a wildly exciting return to form, a thrilling adventure in genre and style climaxing in a bizarre and nightmarish scenario in a slave plantation in 1858. The movie is managed with Tarantino's superb provocation and audacity with a whiplash of cruelty and swagger of scorn. It is superbly acted by Christoph Waltz, Jamie Foxx, Kerry Washington, Leonardo DiCaprio, and particularly Samuel L. Jackson, who creates a masterpiece with his chilling character Steven, the gray, stooping servant elder to DiCaprio's unspeakable slave owner Calvin Candy. Just to make liberals everywhere uneasy, Tarantino and Jackson make Steven the biggest, nastiest Uncle Tom ever, utterly loyal to his white master and severe in his management of the below-stairs race in the big house. He fixes everyone with a chillingly shrewd, malevolent stare made even more disquieting by an unsettling Parkinson's disease tremor, an inspired touch. Steven is overwhelmed with disgust for uppity racial politics, though that isn't how he phrases it, and he and Tarantino drop the satirical N-bomb, targeted with sadistic tactlessness and muscular bad taste at the white man's vitiate collaborators in the Old South. Slavery is a subject on which Hollywood is traditionally nervous and reticent. Perhaps it takes a film unencumbered with good taste to tackle it. Lars von Trier's Manderley was one. Here is another. Django Unchained also has the pure, almost meaningless excitement, which I found sorely lacking in Tarantino's previous film, Inglourious Basterds, with its misfiring spaghetti Nazi trope and boring plot. I can only say Django delivers, wholesale, that particular narcotic and delirious pleasure that Tarantino still knows how to confect in the cinema, something to do with the manipulation of surfaces. It's as unwholesome, deplorable, and delicious as a forbidden cigarette. Django Unchained is a loose reworking of Sergio Corbucci's spaghetti western Django from 1966, starring Franco Nero, who at 71 returns in a brief cameo here. But it is more obviously inspired by Richard Fleischer's exploitation cult item Mandingo, 1975, about a slave trained to fight other slaves, an outrageous movie which Tarantino has often praised, his gleeful support only increased by the critics' nose-wrinkling disapproval. Foxx plays Django, a slave who is being led across Texas in a chain gang when his master meets Dr. King Schultz, a German, played with dapper and dainty eccentricity by Waltz. Claiming to be a traveling dentist, Schultz is driving a bizarre wagon with a huge model of a molar on the top. He buys Django and promises him his freedom in return for a favor. He needs Django to help him track 3 white slave overseers with whom he has business. Django proves himself an able assistant and a brilliant gunfighter, and Schultz is electrified to learn that Django is married to a woman, Kerry Washington, whose German owners taught her the German language and named her Brunhilde, which her subsequent ignorant purchasers mishear as Broomhilde. She was spitefully sold off separately because she, like Django, was always defiantly running away. Now she has been branded on the face as a punishment and forced to work as a comfort girl. Moved by her association with the fatherland, Schultz vows to help Django find Broomhilda and wreak terrible vengeance on the people who mistreated her, a quest which brings them into contact with a staggeringly incompetent KKK posse, straight out of Blazing Saddles, and then into the heart of darkness, the Candyland plantation, ruled by Candy, played by DiCaprio with satanic politesse and bad teeth. But Django must swallow his pride and pretend to be that most hated of things, a mandingo, a fighter trainer and the white man's tame plaything, and uncomfortably close to Steven's domestic servitude. There are moments of pure directorial mastery and audience enjoyment. Schultz creates outrage in a small town by riding in and permitting his black associate to ride a horse alongside him, a privilege which outrages the local racists. The tension leads to a standoff and a gunshot, which induces the townsfolk to stand stock still, astonished, and then a lady faints in the background. A visually inspired touch, and utterly unexpected. It's as if Tarantino has cheerfully snapped his fingers in your stunned face. Django is a long film, undoubtedly, at 2 hours and 45 minutes, and Tarantino may even have been tempted to split it into two, like his Kill Bill movies. But Django relaxes and luxuriates in its long form, balancing deadpan moments of awe and reverence for the landscape, lovingly photographed by Robert Richardson, with the frantic orchestration of tension and violence, cheekily giving us crash zooms on to important faces. Yet the sense of pastiche is relatively restrained. The relationship of Schultz and Django is managed with insouciant ease. Their friendship really looks convincing, and their comedy double act is terrific. Schultz is glum and saturnine, while Django becomes more and more regally resplendent. Foxx is effortlessly charismatic. I can't wait to see this again. History gets another dramatic rewrite, Quentin Tarantino style, in Django Unchained, a jokey, discursive, idiosyncratic and spirited film that does to slave owners what Inglourious Basterds did to Nazis. Applying the episodic format and visual template of classic and spaghetti westerns to a revenge saga mostly set in the Deep South just before the Civil War, the film makes a point of pushing the savagery of slavery to the forefront, but does so in a way that rather amazingly dovetails with the heightened historical, stylistic, and comic sensibilities at play. The anecdotal, Odyssey-like structure of this long, talky saga could be considered indulgent, but Tarantino injects the weighty material with so many jocular, startling, and unexpected touches that it's constantly stimulating. A stellar cast and strong action and comedy elements will attract a good-sized audience internationally, though distaste for the subject matter and the irreverent take on a tragic subject might make some prospective viewers hesitate. Tarantino's affinity for black culture and interest in the ways blacks and whites relate always have been evident, but they've never before been front and center to the extent that they are in Django Unchained. Some might object to the writer-director's tone, historical liberties, comic japes, or other issues, but there can be no question who gets the shaft here. This is a story of justifiable vengeance, pure and simple, and no paleface is spared. Even the good German who facilitates a slave's transformation into a take-no-prisoners hunter of whites who trade in black flesh. At its core, then, the film entirely shares its raison d'etre with Bastards, which climaxed with a conflagration that fancifully obliterated the Nazi regime. It's presented, however, as a lengthy journey, one that feels, both in its equivalent running time and luxuriant magnification of arguably incidental matters, quite like Sergio Leone's great The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. All the same, a lesser-known Italian director of many westerns, Sergio Corbucci, is Tarantino's declared touchstone here. Corbucci made the original Django, starring Franco Nero, in 1966, after which there were dozens of unofficial sequels, though none made by Corbucci. Nero makes a brief appearance here, and in the spirit of European credit lines for famous actors playing small roles in movies, Tarantino amusingly employs the literal translation with the friendly participation of Franco Nero. Imprinting at once his 60s archivist sympathies via the use of an old Columbia Pictures logo, bright red opening credits backed by a self-consciously cornball Western song, and a lead-in title announcing that it's 1858 somewhere in Texas, Tarantino makes anachronistic use of a few spring-loaded zoom shots to introduce Dr. King Schultz, Christoph Waltz in flowing salt and pepper locks and beard, a German bounty hunter posing as an itinerant dentist, as advertised by a large molar that jiggles on a spring atop his small wagon. Unlike most men of the Old West, Schultz is an old-world man of many words, rarely using one where 4 or 5 will do, as he articulately and amusingly explains himself to a succession of skeptical and well-armed ruffians. After considerable verbal ado, he takes down the leaders of a chain gang of slaves, one of whom, Django, Jamie Foxx, can identify the notorious Brittle brothers, for whom Schultz hopes to collect the considerable reward. Freeing the slave from his shackles, the impeccably mannered Schultz is polite and businesslike with the bedraggled Django in a way the latter certainly has never experienced, putting him on a horse, offering him $25 per brother if they find them, and brazenly marching him into a saloon in the next town they hit, to the gaping astonishment of the locals. Expressing the character's confidence in his intelligence and a huckster's delight in his skill at the con, Waltz gives a wonderfully large performance that breathes life into the film from the start. There might, in fact, be an element of fair play in Tarantino, making Waltz's German an exemplary fellow this time around, after the actor's villainous Nazi turn in Bastards, for which he won a supporting actor Oscar. These initial passages serve to communicate how alarming it is in this context for whites to see Anne on a horse. But this is just an appetizer for what white folks will end up encountering at Django's hands before he's done serving up his just desserts, using the manhunting skills taught him by Schultz. In a heart-to-heart, Django reveals that his wife was sold away to another master, but of particular interest to Schultz is the news that her name is Broomhilda, or so the reliably idiosyncratic speller Tarantino presents it, and that she speaks German, as she was raised by people from the old country. After Schultz explains the significance of her name, Django resolves to become his wife's Siegfried, to slay the dragon that is her evil master and rescue his bride. Only Tarantino could come up with such a wild, cross-cultural mash, a smorgasbord of ingredients stemming from spaghetti westerns, German legend, historical slavery, modern rap music, proto-Ku Klux Klan fashion, an assembly of 60s and 70s character actors, and a leading couple meant to be the distant forebears of blaxploitation hero John Shaft, and make it not only digestible but actually pretty delicious. Some of it is over-the-top nutty, and a few things, like a mass argument that sounds like a bunch of modern Californians nattering at one another, come off as rather silly. But much of it is inspired or close to it, just as the underlying outrage at the fact that slavery even existed in this country until 148 years ago is well and truly felt. Quite naturally, given the historical setting, the N-word gets a heavy workout by whites and blacks alike. But much more forceful is the cruelty dispensed by the Southern whites, both as punishment and whim. Attack dogs are unleashed on one-man Mandingo fighters in an homage to the unforgettable 1975 Mandingo, battle to the death in a beautifully appointed drawing room for the wealthy's amusement. A woman is locked naked in a metal hot box. Genital mutilation is arranged for a man, and much more. For all the film's genre-hopping and playful spirit, this dead serious foundation is never far from sight. As Sonny Chiba said in Kill Bill Vol. 1, revenge is never a straight line. And so it is here, as the unlikely pair of Schultz and Django rack up quite a fortune in bounties to finance their scheme to buy back Broomhilda from her owner, Southern Scion Calvin Candy, Leonardo DiCaprio, a smooth-talking, elegant young gentleman who welcomes Schultz to his vast plantation, Candyland, even if he can scarcely tolerate the presence of his black partner, who by now has traded in his ludicrous bright blue Little Lord Fauntleroy suit for the leather hat and sunglasses of a fancy-pants cowboy. Django seethes in silence as the whites discuss business and pleasure over a long dinner. In the process, the film's focus shifts to Candy, whom DiCaprio plays with more relish than he's brought to a part in some time, and Stephen, Samuel L. Jackson, his old house slave whose combination of obsequiousness and diabolical shrewdness makes him a vivid character. Jackson's appearance at first provokes a double take. He's somewhat stooped, filled out in the jowl and bald save for tufts of white hair on top and on the sides. But the Tarantino regular astutely judges just how far to push the jivey dialogue that offsets the subservient nature of the role. When Jackson is on screen, it's impossible to take your eyes off him. The film's greatest problem is that, especially in the second half, the Django character gets a bit lost in the shuffle. He doesn't pop from the screen the way Schultz, Candy, and Steven do. Django is all about being resolute and determined, but more detail could have filled out the character's transformation from downtrodden slave to steely master gunfighter. Schultz teaches him about Siegfried and firearms, but the long journey format could have nicely accommodated a fuller, more gradual account of the expansion of Django's mind and horizons. As it is, he lurches from impotent non-person to cocky dude too abruptly. It's true that cowboy and genre characters needn't be deep, but because the other characters get most of the good lines, Django could have used something they don't have, an extra dimension. Foxx doesn't project the sort of charisma that the lucky few have to rivet audience attention even when they're doing nothing. So when he's not the center of attention, he seems withdrawn and not that interesting. As he's done before, Tarantino has peppered the huge cast with actors whose heydays date back as far as the 60s. Mostly, they play cretinous types and show up just long enough to be recognized before getting killed. Among them are Bruce Dern, Russ Tamblyn, James Remar, Dennis Christopher, James Russo, Don Stroud, Tom Wopat, MC Gainey, Robert Carradine, Ted Neely, Tom Savini, and Michael Parks. Tarantino himself also plays one of these lowlifes. Don Johnson clearly relishes his scenes as a Tennessee plantation Big Daddy whose efforts to launch an early KKK-like raiding party prove inept, while Jonah Hill looks predictably out of place during his few seconds of screen time. Veteran production designer J. Michael Riva died during filming, but his fine hand particularly shows in the detailed interiors for Candyland and a New Orleans brothel. Robert Richardson's cinematography is elegant and rugged as needed. Costume designer Sharon Davis has opportunities for some fun, both with Django's developing wardrobe and Schultz's finery, which includes a suit and cape that prefigures that of Sherlock Holmes. This is the director's first film without his invaluable editor, the late Sally Menke, but Fred Raskin, an assistant editor on the Kill Bill films, has filled in capably. As always with Tarantino, the soundtrack is a wildly eclectic thing. Spaghetti Western scoring master Ennio Morricone is represented by 8 tracks, some recycled and one original song, while there's also rap and more contemporary sounds from the likes of James Brown and Tupac, together in Unchained, The Payback Untouchable, and Rick Ross, as well as Django main theme by Luis Enriquez Bacalov and Rocky Roberts. Quentin Tarantino continues to play with history and cinematic tradition in Django Unchained, his self-proclaimed Southern, whose deposits of blaxploitation and spaghetti western filmmaking engage a violent saga of revenge and historical atrocity. After Inglourious Basterds, in which he set loose a cadre of Jewish American soldiers to rewrite history by killing Adolf Hitler, Tarantino's 8th film arms a freed slave to seek vengeance on the Old South for centuries of racial degradation. Out of necessity to disguise what would otherwise be an unflinching reminder of America's sordid past, Tarantino's highly stylized and self-conscious approach embraces an almost cartoonish level of cinematic boldness. He uses quick camera zooms, historical embellishments and inventions galore, splatters blood about the screen as if tossed from buckets. And his loud soundtrack combines twangy Western songs, the postmodern presence of rap, and Ennio Morricone riffs, all in service of this ethically just, wildly entertaining, often controversial motion picture. Reactions to the film have inspired nothing if not passionate assessments, with questions and accusations of racism and the trivialization of slavery at the center of these arguments. Spike Lee condemned the picture as disrespectful for its 100+ uses of the N-word and the depiction of slavery in an almost satirized light, while the NAACP Image Awards nominated it for Outstanding Motion Picture. Tarantino's pastiche remains both political and therapeutic. using graphic acts of violence against the black slave characters in his film as examination, and doles out arguably even more violent retribution against his deplorable slave-owning characters. Instead of treating his tragic subject matter with pure gravity, Tarantino, ever the pop culture revisionist, chooses cinematic fantasy to produce catharsis and allow for one of the rare times in a motion picture western someone other than a white man the opportunity for bloody justice. Aside from a few such examples like Navajo Joe, 1966, an admitted influence for Tarantino on Django Unchained, traditionally wronged white men have the exclusive moral right in westerns to exact vengeance. The archetypal example being The Searchers, 1956, where John Wayne kills countless Comanches in pursuit of his kidnapped niece. By shifting the action from the Wild West to the Old South, Tarantino's long-standing attraction to black culture receives its first complete embrace, although his third film, Jackie Brown, 1998, comes very close to this as well. The director's racial role reversal begins on a chill night somewhere in Texas in 1858, when the wordy but eloquent German bounty hunter Dr. King Schultz, Christoph Waltz, stops a chain gang of slaves being escorted by two white traders. Schultz is looking for a slave named Django, Jamie Foxx, to identify the Brittle brothers, whom Schultz has never seen. Dispensing with Django's white escorts and freeing him from his shackles, the rather moralized Schultz, the sole sympathetic white man in the picture, offers Django a proposition of $25 a brittle head should he assist. As for Django's slave status, Schultz casually remarks, "For the time being, I'm going to make this slavery rigmarole work to my advantage." Schultz may seem like an immoral, cold-blooded bounty hunter, but his cultured humanity finds slavery disgusting and uncivilized, if not completely silly. Schultz imparts his man-hunting skills onto the quick-study Django and finds his new sidekick has a backstory that draws comparisons to the German legend of Siegfried and Brunhilde on the mountain. Inspired, Schultz agrees to help rescue Django's wife, named Broomhilda, Kerry Washington no less, who was sold by their former owner to sadistic slaver Calvin Candy, Leonardo DiCaprio, after the couple tried to escape captivity together. After a winter's worth of learning the bounty trade, Django and Schultz make their way to Candyland, Candy's notorious Mississippi plantation, where the two put on an act as businessmen interested in purchasing a Mandingo fighter. The suave yet base Candy's chief pastime involves holding to-the-death gladiatorial bouts between slaves. One such scene of hand-to-hand combat ends with a hammer and is so jarring you have to look away. The victor is rewarded with a single beer. When our heroes eventually reach Candyland, Candy's aged top house slave, Stephen, Samuel L. Jackson, distrusts the new guests, especially Django, who puts on airs as a freed black man riding a horse. In a way, Candy's raw evil and sadism are less aggravating than the diabolical nature of Stephen's Uncle Tom, whose loyalty to his master never questions white superiority. In comparison to Pulp Fiction, Death Proof, or Inglourious Basterds, Tarantino's narrative structure proves linear and less reliant on protracted scenes of dialogue that lead to bursts of violence, although there's no shortage of bloodshed here. Granted, 2 or 3 passages play out in Tarantino's usual lovingly prolonged fashion, such as the dinner table discussion at Candyland that becomes unbearably tense as Candy delivers his phrenological thesis on the innate submissiveness in black slaves, or a comical discussion on the lack of visibility from within the hoods worn by Ku Klux Klan members. Django Unchained is a journey that seems to reach its destination at the flamboyantly named plantation, but then takes some unexpected turns in the last act. The climax does not arrive at the film's bloodiest shootout, but it carries into threatening territory. Throughout the picture, Tarantino spills as much blood as his 2 Kill Bill volumes combined, if not more. Every time a bullet makes contact, flowing splashes of red burst, as though everyone on screen was made of balloons that pop when penetrated. As always, the director's instances of violence feel less realistic than intentionally over the top, including several threats to and punishments on male genitalia. To say the violence becomes excessive is missing the point, which has more to do with Tarantino's embrace of spaghetti westerns and his abhorrence of slavery than with purveying mindless killing. More than the obvious genre practitioner Sergio Leone, whose The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, lends Django Unchained its epic feel and runtime, 2 hours and 45 minutes, Tarantino develops from Sergio Corbucci. As always, a level of Tarantino's work is about cinema itself, paying homage through a series of references and reverences that comes across less as derivations, but rather as pure inspiration. Behind Corbucci's aforementioned Navajo Joe and his cult classic Django, 1966, which starred Franco Nero, who appears here in a cameo, Corbucci's gritty, actionized style finds a modern counterpart in Tarantino's hands. Other nods: Richard Fleischer's Mandingo, 1975, the slave fighting yarn from which Tarantino borrowed the name for his film's Bloodsport, Scorsese's Taxi Driver, 1976, with Schultz's retractable gun up his sleeve, and virtually any Western between 1930 and 1970 that used a title song and featured two men riding out against a common evil, i.e., a lot of them. That Tarantino happens to be a postmodern trendsetter in cinematic style, and also a renowned actors director at the same time, is still a curiosity. Writing Schultz specifically for Christoph Waltz, who won an Oscar for his supporting role in Inglourious Basterds, Tarantino uses the actor's strength for long bouts of verbal showmanship. Schultz is a complicated character with a probing sense of morality that takes him into unforeseen nobility. We cannot help but want to know more about him, whereas Foxx's Django remains a singular epitome of human revenge. Foxx is perfectly suited for Django, a role originally meant for Will Smith. He has a level of vulnerability that makes scenes where he must stay in character around Candy unbearable for the audience. And then there's DiCaprio's villain, a vile and superficial specimen with a yellow-toothed grin. A brilliant moment occurs when Schultz reveals that Candy's revered author Alexandre Dumas was black, and we see the vain weakness exposed. DiCaprio may finally earn himself an Oscar for this lurid portrayal, a performance where the actor is clearly having fun, being what must be one of the most despised characters in movie history. As suggested, however, even worse is Jackson Stephen, who puts on quite a show in front of guests, but behind closed doors becomes his master's strategic confidant. Meanwhile, Tarantino's supporting cast includes some of the director's favorites from yesterday and today: Zoe Bell, Robert Carradine, Bruce Dern, Jonah Hill, Don Johnson, Michael Parks, MC Gainey, and Tom Wopat. Only Quentin Tarantino could so effortlessly walk the line between offensive and entertaining, and then smash that line as he does in Django Unchained. His strangely hilarious, shockingly brutal, artistically inspired, and always mesmerizing style provides a level of intertextual cinema that challenges as much as it provides a rollicking good time. Take away the vengeful blood and guts and torturous violence, and Tarantino has provided a moralist film with a resounding repulsion towards slavery that occupies his film's characters and themes. America refuses to look into its past and acknowledge the atrocity of slavery in full scope. Tarantino isn't afraid to do this in such a way that refuses to look away. He may adhere to history's excessive use of a certain word and portray the Old South as unflinchingly unpleasant. But if Tarantino ever gets to a point where he's pulling his punches to satisfy his detractors, there would be far more to complain about. Shot with a magnificent eye by cinematographer Robert Richardson, Django Unchained is an instant classic within both Tarantino's oeuvre and the Western genre, and the way it toys and transcends racial and historical sensitivities makes it perhaps the most divisive motion picture of 2012. One of the great strengths of Quentin Tarantino's films is the way his love of cinema permeates every frame. From subtle, throwaway lines and in-jokes to more obvious nods, such as the old-fashioned Columbia logo at the beginning or the 70s-style opening credits, it wins its way through his productions. Over the course of his career, Tarantino has paid homage to a number of genres. With Django Unchained, it's time for the Western. Of course, the director never does anything in a straightforward manner, so this is also a revenge flick and a somewhat offbeat comedy. Tarantino may be the best working director to take scenes of blood, mayhem, and gore and transform them into moments of hilarity. Pulp Fiction introduced this tendency, "Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face," and Tarantino has honed it since. Despite the occasional brutality of the material, Django Unchained includes some of the best laugh-aloud scenes of any 2012 motion picture, regardless of the genre. Over the years, we have come to expect things from Tarantino, and he delivers most of them in Django Unchained. There are the high-octane action scenes, which tend to be short and brutal. There's copious gore. When someone gets shot, you can be damn sure he's going to bleed. There's a tendency for the director to thumb his nose at political correctness. We're bound to see female bare feet at some point. And there's a sense of energy and momentum that culminates in satisfying violence. Perhaps the only thing somewhat on the back burner in Django Unchained is Tarantino's penchant for witty repartee and clever monologues. There's a little of it here, but not nearly as much as in some of his previous endeavors. Still, this is very much a Quentin Tarantino film in every sense of the phrase, and those who build expectations based on those 4 words won't be disappointed. The movie opens in 1858 Texas with the unorthodox purchase of a slave, Django, Jamie Foxx, by a dentist-turned-bounty hunter, Dr. King Schultz, Christoph Waltz. Since Schultz doesn't believe in slavery, he soon frees Django and the two become partners in Schultz's business. After a profitable winter, they head to Mississippi, where their goal is to locate Django's wife, Broomhilda, Carrie Washington. When they succeed, they find an excuse to be invited to the plantation where she is being held. There they are guests of the mansion's master, Calvin Candy, Leonardo DiCaprio, where their act bamboozles everyone, except Candy's personal slave, Stephen, Samuel L. Jackson, who smells a rat the moment he sets eyes on Django. As has been true of past efforts, Tarantino coaxes memorable performances out of his actors. Joining the ranks of John Travolta, Uma Thurman, and Christoph Waltz, among others, is Jamie Foxx. After Ray, Foxx was viewed seriously as a dramatic actor, but he hasn't been given much of note to do in recent years. With Django Unchained, Tarantino provides him a meaty role, and he tears into it with relish. He also displays a warm and unique chemistry with co-star Waltz, who is once again great. Leonardo DiCaprio, in a rare supporting role, shows that despite his heartthrob reputation, he's capable of playing a truly loathsome villain. Samuel L. Jackson, buried under prosthetics and makeup, is recognizable primarily because of his voice and attitude. Tarantino's Reclamation Project, in which he takes a once popular actor and gives him something interesting to do, is Don Johnson, although his screen time is limited. There are a few notable cameos: Jonah Hill, Amber Tamblyn, Bruce Dern, Tom Savini, Robert Carradine, and Franco Nero, who played the lead character in the unrelated 1966 film Django. One of the best things about Tarantino films in general, and Django Unchained in particular, is that the viewer is never sure where the narrative is going. Tarantino delights in unexpected surprises, some of which are sudden and violent. Consider, for example, John Travolta's death midway through Pulp Fiction. I'd wager no one saw that coming. While there's nothing quite that dramatic in Django Unchained, the movie has its moments, and the storyline doesn't follow an unbending trajectory. Although it's technically a Western, Tarantino doesn't feel constrained by limits often placed on the genre. He stirs in elements of exploitation, blaxploitation, to give Django Unchained a more pulpy, high-energy feel. This is a serious movie with some serious things to say about how blacks were treated in the Old South, but there's plenty of action to go along with the darker material. Not unexpectedly, Tarantino inserts himself into Django Unchained in a part that's larger than a cameo and smaller than a supporting role. It's tough to say whether his acting has improved, but he tries on an Australian accent that is ridiculously bad. However, the director may be self-aware enough to recognize his limitations in front of the camera, and his appearance, distracting as it is, could be designed to be cheesy. Or not. Difficult to say. Django Unchained may be Tarantino's most uplifting movie to date. Without revealing the ending, I can say it's less nihilistic than that of, say, Reservoir Dogs. Age may not have mellowed Tarantino, but at least he can see the value in a little optimism. Django Unchained isn't in the absolute top tier of the director's films. I consider Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Inglourious Basterds to be more complete experiences. But this is a fine, accomplished effort, and a great way to spend nearly 3 hours in a movie theater. Most people will leave with a smile, and those who don't probably should have gone to see something softer in the first place. Clothing for staff during filming. Theatrical run. Django Unchained was released on December 25, 2012 in the United States by the Weinstein Company and released on January 18, 2013 by Sony Pictures, releasing in the United Kingdom. The film was screened for the first time at the Directors Guild of America on December 1, 2012, with additional screening events having been held for critics leading up to the film's wide release. The premiere of Django Unchained was delayed by 1 week following the shooting at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012. The film was released on March 22, 2013 by Sony Pictures in India. In March 2013, Django Unchained was announced to be the first Tarantino film approved for official distribution in China's strictly controlled film. Market Lily CUO, writing for Quartz, wrote that the film depicts one of America's darker periods when slavery was legal, which Chinese officials like to use to push back against criticism from the United States. The film was released in China on May 12, 2013. Home media, the film was released on DVD, Blu-ray, and digital download on April 16, 2013 in the United States. The film has grossed $31 M939 733 from DVD sales and $3,286 1838 from Blu-ray sales, making a total of $62,200. Go Unchained grossed $62.8 million in the United States and Canada and $263.4 million other territory, for a worldwide total of $426 million, against a production budget of $100 million as of 2013. Django Unchained is Tarantino's highest-grossing film, surpassing his 2009 film Inglourious Basterds, which grossed $3,214 million worldwide in North America. The film made $15 million on Christmas Day, finishing second behind fellow opener Les Miserables. It was the third biggest opening day figure for a film on Christmas, following Sherlock Holmes' $24.6 million and Les Miserables' $18.1 million. It went on to make $30.1 million in its opening weekend, a 6-day total of $3.4 million, finishing second behind Holdover the Hobbit and Unexpected Journey. Critical response on review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes. The film holds an approval rating of 87% based on 291 reviews and an average rating of 8.10, the website's critical consensus. Reads bold, bloody, and stylistically daring. Django Unchained is another incendiary masterpiece from Quentin Tarantino that a critic, which assigns a rating to reviews, gives the film a weighted average score of 81 out of 100, based on 42 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Audiences pulled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of on in a plus to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 4 stars out of 4, and said the film offers one sensational sequence after another, all set around these two intriguing characters who seem opposites but share pragmatic financial and personal issues. Adbert also added, had I not been prevented from seeing it sooner because of an injury, this would have been on my year's best films list. Peter Branshaw, film critic for The Guardian, awarded the film 5 stars, writing, I can only say Django delivers wholesale that particular narcotic and delirious pleasure that Tarantino still knows how to confect in the cinema, something to do. With the manipulation of surfaces, it's as UNH wholesome, deplorable, and delicious as a forbidden cigarette. Writing in the New York Times Critica, Scott compared Django to Tarantino's earlier Inglourious Basterds, like in Glorious Bastards D. Django Unchained is crazily entertaining, brazenly irresponsible, and also ethically serious, in a way that is entirely consistent with its playfulness, designating the film a Times critic's pick. Scott said D. Django is a troubling and important movie about slavery and racism. Filmmaker Michael Moore Prajunga tweeting that the movie is one of the best film satire ever. To the contrary, Owen Glaberman, film critic for the Entertainment Weekly, wrote, Django isn't nearly the film that Inglorious was. It's less clever and it doesn't have enough major characters or enough of Tarantino's trademark structural ingenuity to earn its 2-hour and 45-minute running time in his review. For the Indie Week, David Feth wrote, Django Unchained shows signs that Tarantino did little research, beyond repeated viewings, of Sergio Corbucci's 1966 spaghetti western Django and a black exploitation from 1975 called Boss, written by and starring Fred Williamson. New Yorker's Anthony Lane was disturbed by their Tarantino fans' yelps of triumphant laughter at the screening I attended as a white woman, was blown away by Django's guns. An entire issue of the academic journal Savone was devoted to Django Unchained and Django Unchained, and the global western featuring scholars who contextualize Tarantino's film as a classic western. Dana Phillips writes, Tarantino's film is immensely entertaining, not despite, but because it is so very audacious even at times. Downright lurid, thanks to its treatment of slavery, race relations, and that staple of the Western violence, no doubt. These are matters that another director would have handled more delicately and with less stylistic excess than Tarantino, who has never been bashful. Another director also would have been less willing to proclaim his film the first in a new genre. The several other information about this movie. This movie directed by Quentin Tarantino, written by Quentin Tarantino, produced by Stacey, Sher, Reginald Hudlin Killer Savone, starring Jamie Foxx, Christoph Waltz, Leonardo DiCaprio, Cree Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, Walton Goggins, Dennis Christopher James Remar, Michael Parks, Don Johnson. Cinematography, Robert Richardson, edited by Fred Raskin. Production companies, A. Band Art Columbia Pictures, distributed by the Weinstein Company, Columbia Pictures. Sony Pictures, release dates December 11th, 2012, Ziegfeld Theater, December 25th, 2012, United States, running time 165 minutes, country, United Box. States language, English, budget $100 million, box office $426 million. So guys, this is the review of Django Unchained movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.